So you're welcome. In this session, we are going to look at decision making and ethical dilemma. So we are looking at the concept of decision making and then the ethics, the dilemma behind the ethical consideration during decision making processes. Now we look at the concept of decision making. What is decision making? So before we dive into what decision making is, we see that everyone has the potential to make decisions, whether you're making decisions at personal level, at organizational level, or at institutional level. Even at national level, people make decisions. So we can make decisions everywhere. So whether the decisions are appropriate or inappropriate, we are making decisions. However, one needs to properly assess and examine the decisions that are made so that we eliminate what we call consequences. Because if decisions come with consequences, but they also come with benefits. So it depends on the quality of the decision that one takes. Either the decision increases consequences or increases benefits. So when decisions are not examined, then they can increase consequences, regardless of who is making the decision, regardless of the positions in which you occupy in either an organization or community. So we see that a decision is a small unit of a plan. So even a plan is a package of decisions that a person or an organization has resolved to undertake. So when we make decisions, those decisions actually determine how we are going to behave, because we behave according to our own decisions. For example, one can decide to steal or not to steal. So this sets a normative, what we call a normative, whether what should the person do, and what should the person think, and that now determines whether the decision is appropriate or inappropriate. Now we see what is a decision, what is a decision, and so what is decision making. Decision making is a process of selecting the right course of action. So here we are selecting the right course of action from a multitude of alternatives. So there are several alternatives that we are always having. And then the process of selecting out the right alternative or the most appropriate alternative that serves to resolve the need or the problem, that's where we are seeing decision making. So that means that to make decisions, one has got to look at what are the possible alternatives to an existing problem or a challenge. So we have to collect quite a number of alternatives, which alternatives here we are calling them options. These are options which we need to to navigate, we need to examine various options before we resolve on what can best be done. So when we look at the workplace or our enterprise, an enterprise is also viewed as a pool of alternatives. Possibly the sales are not coming as much as we desired, or the customers are not turning up, or there are some complaints about some products, and there are several alternatives. One can decide to scrap off some products so that we no longer produce them. Another one can seek to improve the very product but not again scrapping it off. Another one can choose to change the suppliers of raw materials for that product. Other people can choose to change the skill set, the skills of the worker. So those are several alternatives that are there. But we ask ourselves, what is the best alternative during the process of decision making? So we have to really operate in what we call a supply of what? Alternatives. So we need to collect various alternatives and examine them. In entrepreneurship, you don't simply look at one thing and then resolve what to be done. And after you have done it, you've spent money, time, efforts, then you say that was not proper. I think we needed to do this other. To us, that is a loss-making deal, not only losing money, but also losing on time, losing on efforts, and wearing down the institution. Now, we need to undertake what we call a decision-making process here, which we are also calling the decision-making cycle. So this decision-making process is starting with identifying the decision problem. What is the problem at hand? It may be a problem or a need within the institution. Some people found that there is a need to eliminate dust in the institution and resolved to pave the what? The ground. But possibly another one could have said, let us stomach it. And so now, this now requires understanding what the need is, what is needed to be decided. Then after identifying what the problem we have or the need, then we start gathering information and about what to be done. We would have just known the need and taken what? Resolved what to do. But then here we need to gather some information, and then so we collect information through finding out. Some of the decision making processes involve engaging stakeholders and making inquiries on what to be done. On what to be done. So This is now collecting information. It's like one way of doing research. Then when the information that we collect from stakeholders, even uh, um, they could be internal stakeholders such as staff, directors, or external stakeholders such as customers, suppliers, authorities, or those regulating bodies. So then we can now set alternatives of what should be done. You will see that even if it was tarmac, it was paving a ground near the road, that courtyard, the owners of the institution have got to apply for paving that ground from the local government. You pave the ground without having applied for it and they have not authorized it, they can break down your whatever you have done and actually penalize you for paving a ground where the government is expecting water to pass or electricity. Now they will guide you on where, even putting a culvert somewhere, you've got to apply for it. So these alternatives, when they are corrected from the information gathered, then we can now start to weigh these alternatives to see which one can best work. How do we weigh these alternatives? The possible alternatives that we have, we subject them to measures such as what is the cost of each alternative. We look at what are the benefits if that alternative is taken above the other. And then what is the time required to execute such an alternative? Is the alternative feasible? Feasibility is about is it doable? Is it doable? Okay. So then now we can measure. We shall look at the considerations or one has got to undertake during a decision making processes. So then afterwards we can choose among these alternatives the best what alternative. And this we also consider that the alternative should be best also while considering that such an alternative is within the objectives and the values of the institution. Then you take the best, you resolve on the best alternative to take and then transform that alternative into an action. Now there, the action, you've resolved to take action about the best alternative. Then after executing the best alternative, that is the best decision, then we can do a review of the decision. You can review the decision and see whether it has worked out or there is something that is still needing by looking at the what? The outcomes. Where the outcomes that we intended here, the objective achieved by executing an, such an alternative or by undertaking such a decision, then a review can be undertaken to improve the actions. Now we have also some considerations here. Now there is that we call the ethical dilemma. A dilemma is like a point of confusion where we look at decision making. The decision making process is really a very challenging element to undertake, because there are some certain aspects we call conflict of what, of interest. The alternative that you would think works well, another person may not think that that is how, that is an alternative that will actually be working. So it may create a point of conflict where people come argue with each other, and actually resolve on nothing, and go to take action on nothing. Or they argue with each other and the majority takes the what, the wrong cause. It is also possible to democratically decide where the biggest majority is actually the one with the weakest alternative. So, should we employ experts who are called decision making experts? Because there are also some institutions where the board, there is a board of directors that sits in a room called the boardroom, makes decisions, and actually pass them on to others. Should we consider that there are some people who are supposed to be making decisions and others have to simply adopt already made decisions? Hmm? Can we consider that there are people who cannot make decisions? Okay. Okay. So what we call an ethical dilemma is that you'll be like at the crossroad, on the roundabout, where there are many roads that are continuing, and therefore in the pool of alternatives, the best alternative, what is called the best alternative, can be called a best alternative because it has not yet been implemented. And after implementing it, then we see, it is it is not working well. So some scholars say a decision can never be evaluated to examined to, to 100% unless it has been implemented. However, we can labor to examine and assess the environment or the situations around which a decision can be taken, and these situations we keep comparing and seeing whether, if we took such a decision, all the conditions are favorable. Now, these are some aspects to consider during decision making, so that these aspects help us to select the best alternative. So when one is to make a decision, should consider these are internal factors, internal aspects. Internal because they are actually within the organization. For example, one has got to look at the objective. What's the main objective for undertaking a decision? For example, a company is resolved to have strategic plans so that all activities and all the endeavors of the organization are embodied within this strategic plan, and nothing should be done outside the strategic plan. Every activity should be within the strategic plan. Now, when a manager comes in and has suggestions to do, then a person can raise up and say, let us open and see where it is in the strategic plan. If it isn't in the strategic plan, the manager is advised to do that in the next strategic planning season period. So if possibly the strategic plan was 5 years, the manager is told, please, after 5 years, that's when you can do that. And if you are to do it, include it in the strategic plan. If it is omitted, then it will not be done, because that will be the center of priorities. So the organization here has got to assess the needs within the organization and outside the organization, and actually set objectives, which objectives are usually integrated in the strategic plan and in the operational plan or the action plan. So if a decision is to be taken, it has got to be weighed against the objectives. Then we also look at the aspect of time. For example, if it is purchasing and it's possibly a school, and we are going to purchase food for students, then we have got to time when to buy, because the prices of, for example, maize, flour, and beans can be lower at the time of harvesting. So if one was to purchase, would best purchase during just immediately farmers are harvesting, other than delaying to purchase and purchasing simply because students have paid fees. And by the time the students have paid the fees, the prices of maize and beans has gone high. It is out of season. It is a season for collecting fees, but not a season for purchasing your food. So this timing is very key in decision making. You've seen a deviation in somehow where the institution is paving the ground, at the same time the clients are arriving, and then they have nowhere to pass. That is an aspect of timing. But of course, there are also other factors surrounding it. Time, because decision making cannot be enclosed within one basket, but it should be right time to undertake such a decision. The other is resources. We are taking the decision, but do we have the resources to facilitate it? Some of the resources could be materials and non-material resources, could be data resources, but even data is a resource. Data. Do we have the statistics to bring for us a projection that tells us that if we undertake such a decision, sales are going to increase to some level, and then our expenses, then we can see whether there is profitability. Then do we have the expertise to execute that decision? Then we can look at the cost, the process cost, or the cost of undertaking such a decision. So that means that one has got to come with a already laid costing plan or a budget which shows how much it takes to execute such a what? An alternative. If the costs are high and cannot be afforded, then that decision can be delayed or abandoned. If the resources to facilitate that decision are not there, then we can also find what else we can do. So we put our decisions under this consideration to see whether such a decision should be considered or not considered. That is internal. Sorry? These are quadrants. These are quadrants. This is a circle which is out of 100. So each part here is 100 divided by 4. So when you weigh it on time, you your 25% internally, you've at 25% considered an internal factor. You take it to resource, you're covering another 25%. These are what? Resources, 25%. You come up with the cost, that is another 25% on 50, so 75, until you measure it on objectives. But most people start with objectives, then go to time, resources, and the cost. If it doesn't measure on objectives, then you don't need to look at time. Now, external factors which are possibly outside the what? The organization, but are affecting the way we decide. One is we look at the political environment. These environments in details, you will have to re-examine them in details. At the political environment is now you look at the leadership of the community and what is accepted in the community in terms of leadership and what is not accepted. That's why in making some of the decisions, institutions labor to integrate the local leaders and local government persons to get their view about some of the decisions. You could be thinking of building up a road, widening a road to your factory, and you have made a decision to widen that road, thinking that because you're widening it and it was narrower, people were like struggling to pass through it. But people who are owning that land actually desired to have a narrow road because it does not encroach on their land, so they can grow their bananas near the road. And when you are widening, they are seeing that the place for where they would grow their bananas is being eaten up by your expansion of the road. And before you know it, you are expanding, people are uprising against your project of expanding the road. They are burning the car, yeah, because they are not satisfied with the action. So politically, the community has to be examined. The detail of it, you'll have to to stay. You could decide to put on some uniform, but the community perceives that you're possibly belonging to a certain political party. And that's the reason why you're putting on the uniform. And then you will see some clients not turning up to purchase some goods from you because your color is for a particular political inclination. Even use of logos, use of some some graphical logos can be considered in the political environment as something different. Then the legal environment, legally, you may need to have some contracts signed by clients, and those contracts have to be with clauses which are clear and therefore may need to engage either a legal person to draw them. But still, there are also what we call statutory documents needed in some of the decisions to be taken. For example, setting up a school, establishing a clinic where students have got to be injected has got to register with the Ministry of Health that is actually commencing such a clinic and that it has an authorized nurse to operate it. You set up the clinic, somebody swallows medicine from the clinic because some teachers know which medicine cures flu, and the person actually collapses. If the school is sued in the courts of law, you are bound to lose the school if the penalty is too huge that you cannot afford. You've seen some businesses where they don't have a license, they are not paying taxes, but they are there operating. They are not legally complying with the statutory provisions. So some of the decisions may attract taxes. You want to trade in a product, but that product has a tax implication, but you have not thought about it. As you're transporting it from the borders, they check and impound the products, that these products have not paid this particular tax. The cultural dynamics, the natural environment, and the technological environment, then economic environment and social environment has got to be also considered in the way we make decisions. A detail of each of these environments will be examined in our section called environment, business environment. Business environments. Now, these are some of the stakeholders that are affected by a decision undertaken. They are affected by a decision, but they can also be uh, they can also affect the decision themselves. Now, this the first we have looked at here are the employers, what we call the employers can be shareholders or the directors of the institution. Now, the employer or the shareholders have their interest in the institution. Now, you start to get money, buy a van which is going to transport items to make sales. But for them, they are thinking possibly the van wouldn't have been bought. Instead, you would have contracted somebody who has already a van and hired it. That's why where managers are making decisions, to make decisions, they propose them to the directors for approval. When the directors approve, the decision can be implemented. But when the manager makes a decision ignoring the interests of the directors and shareholders, there will always be conflicts due to decisions, and such a manager may be thought to be inadequate in decision making. So actually, in some company where I was working, the directors were approving checks, and if you are to write a check, you've got to requisition for the money, and somebody signs the requisition, and after you write a check, they've got, when the check goes on the account, before it is cleared, a message goes on their phones to approve clearance of such a check. So if you undertook a decision and then they don't know about the check, but they are seeing a message going to their phone that there is a check to approve, they immediately call, this check is for what? How was it written without a requisition? So there could be that dilemma. So you also consider the directors and the interests of the shareholders while making decisions. Then the employees in the institution. You can make a decision, but the employees decide to say, if they have made their own decision, we have not been involved. Let us see what they are going to do with it. Let us wait. So they stand aside, and because they have not been involved in process, the decision making process, so they abstain from implementing. So you have to consider the employees as well, and also decisions have got to favor employees, and also consider their welfare. If you decide to set a meeting at 7 a.m. and some employees are traveling for 2 hours, then to reach your workplace, then it means that they have got to wake up at 5. It is a burden to the employee, but to you it is not a burden because you're driving a car and you're coming from nearby. Then customers. Some decisions can affect customers. That's why you'll find that if there is a stock counting or stock taking where goods will not be sold that day, a week before, the supermarket or this business is informing customers that next week on this date we are not going to be operating, so that the customer does not suffer all the distance to come to make a purchase and find the shop closed or the business is closed. And before you know it, people are telling them, please, we are not selling, we have closed because we are undertaking stock counting. So a notice is given to the what? To the general public, because to be affected by the decision. Even change in the text is communicated. Change in the logos. I saw, that was Steel and Tube. Steel and Tube was changing its logo. And then it published on what? Steel and Tube and the Total Energy. On the billboards, they were communicating that we are remolding ourselves. We are changing. Then from to, so that when you change the logo, the client is thinking that's another client, that's another supplier. Or possibly they doubt the quality of the work of the product. and they will discern, they will avoid to buy such a product because they are not aware of the decision you took. The supplier, that's why suppliers, for example, in schools, those who supply firewood, supplying food items, yes, themselves can know that the term is has ended. But possibly if you are ending the term 1 week before the national closure of the school term, the supplier is not aware. You've closed, but the supplier is bringing what? The food items. And then it is closed, has driven all the fuel, and is now, you're saying we no longer need the food because we closed 1 week. So if we were to close earlier, we would inform the suppliers that we will supply up to this date. Beyond that, we shall not be available or in need of your services. Other partners, some institutions are working closely with others. These partners could be other organizations. If, for example, there is a change in fees, then letters have got to be written to the sponsors, those organizations that are sponsoring their children in the school, that fees will be changed from this to the other. Otherwise, students in that school, when they start communicating to their partners that they have increased the fees, the partners can assume that those students are intending to cheat or to fleece them for their own gain. Then the government and its agents, mostly governments are looking at compliance. If you took a decision to, when the student goes wrong, you cane the student 2 strokes, but the government is saying no student should be caned. So the decision has been made outside the government provisions. Before you know it, you've caned the student for a good reason, but they are raising up against you for having mistreated and exposed the student to an injustice. Other government agencies that are concerned, if it was a bank, banks are regulated by Bank of Uganda, and therefore have got to operate within the provisions of and the regulations of Bank of Uganda. If it was a clinic or a drug shop, then National Drug Authority is concerned. If it is a school, then the Ministry of Education is directly concerned, and they actually license operations of the school. I know of a school that has tagged its name international, but it had not operated an international curriculum. So the ministry asked it to scrap off that name and go and re-register for a name that does not have the word international. Yeah, if the government enters in it and checks which curriculum are you using, and you're using the national curriculum, you're not registered on the international curriculum, so then they can intervene. URA, Uganda Revenue Authority, uh, NSSF, National Social Security Fund, employees are not, you're charging employees NSSF, but you're not paying it. You're charging employees pay as you earn, but you're not paying it. Or you are operating in a Kampala Capital City Authority, but you don't have a KCCA license. Or in any other location, but you don't have a local government license. Even considering the what? the community. You could choose to put a piggery project in the extreme end of the corner, and the people there are saying it is stinking. The smell during rainy season. You have got to say how you're going to protect the community. You're channeling rubbish into people's houses or sewage. So these are the community is involved. If it is noise coming from your factory, you've got to show how you're going to contain that noise within the factory without interrupting the external community. So all that and others, put here some dots. So I would like to close this session here, and then we go to our other lecture.